Good morning. Yes. Glad to have you with us here today. I'm David McMillan. We're going to continue on our lessons with Samuel, Saul, and David. Before we get started, let's go ahead and have a quick word of prayer. Father God, we love you so much. We thank you so much for your presence in our lives. We thank you for your the word of God that you've given us. We pray that we can learn to study it each day and to gain new insights. We pray that you help us to understand it and pray that you help me to remember all the things that you've taught me and especially the good stuff. We pray all that in your son's name. Amen. Okay, today's lesson, we have an animation I didn't intend to have, but today's lesson is called His Heart Died Within Him, and it's not particularly... I just liked it. Was in one of the verses, and I kind of like that, so we just kind of went with that. I'm not sure necessarily the best title, but it's catchy anyway. So, His Heart Died Within Him. Let's go over last week's information. Last week, we talked about David getting supplies at Nob from Ahimelech the priest. Doeg, the Edomite, spied on David, and Saul had him kill the priest. David went to Gath and faked insanity to prevent Achish from killing him. David saves his family in Moab and Abiathar too. At the cave of Adullam, David picks up disenfranchised followers. David saves the citizens of Keilah, but they turn him in. And then David cuts off the corner of Saul's robe, but will not harm him. So that kind of gets us caught up. Basically, if the running part of David's story kind of wears you out, we're just about done with that part. Today's lesson will be a lot more in place, but there will be still a little bit more running. And then week after that, we'll be changing that. But we still have that the same map that I was using last week. Okay, at the start of 1 Samuel chapter 25. Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him in his house at Ramah. So I think it's only appropriate that at this point we talk a little bit about Samuel and what is it about Samuel? There's so many things that are good. And in all honesty, I was thinking about this before I got here. To me, I love David. He's really the heart of Samuel. But at the same time, I love Samuel. Samuel has so many good and positive attributes that we should all emulate. First of all, he starts out as an answered prayer. I just think that's so important to remember that because we should pray for leaders, for the church because the church always needs more leaders. And Samuel was such a leader. That was an answered prayer. I just think that's amazing. He is a man who heard God speak, not just in dreams and visions. Of that, we're all envious. We'd all like to hear God speak, I imagine. A man who grew in favor with God and man, similar to the description in the Old Testament is similar to how they describe Jesus in the New Testament. A man devoted to prayer. And this is an important part. I was talking to a friend of mine last week about this material, and he told me, he goes, God is how David got through all this stuff. God helped him get through this stuff. And sometimes you look at all the details and you get caught up in the details and you forget that really what makes David special is the Lord was with him. That's really the bottom line. And when you're devoted to prayer, when you put God first, in your mindset, that just comes naturally to you. And I think that's a really important point. And that's how Samuel kept God first in his life. He was also a man devoted to teaching. He created gatekeepers for the tabernacle as well as founded a school for prophets. I didn't go into detail on that. That's recorded elsewhere in the Bible. He led a spiritual revival and encouraged Israel to follow the Lord. He was a judge for 40 years. He raised an Ebenezer, which meant up to this point the Lord has helped. Now, if you can kind of see in the background, you see a stone or two. This may be what it was like. Whenever they raised monuments back in the day, they took 12 stones for the 12 tribes of Israel and arranged them in a formation. And then whenever the children would say, see these stones, the father would say, this is what these stones mean. I think that's a really neat thing that they did back then, and it got me thinking about a few things. Some people have what they call prayer journals or something similar, where you write down all the things that you're praying for, things that are on your mind, the things that you set before the Lord. And you write those down every day, and then you can go back and look at that, and you can say, I was praying for this here, and this happened here. I mean, it's kind of a neat way to do that. It's something I haven't done. I hate advocating something I've never done, but it seems like a great idea, and it has a biblical base if you look at the Old Testament. All right. And of course, he rebuked Saul and taught us that obedience is greater than sacrifice. But let's move on. Then David rose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. Then there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel. The man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. He was shearing sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of the wife was Abigail. The woman was discerning and beautiful, but the man was harsh and badly behaved. He was a Calebite. Okay. One thing you may not remember, David, when asked about if he would marry Michal, he said, I'm just a poor boy, basically, more or less. So here we have a poor shepherd encountering a rich owner of sheep. Let's see how this turns out. Our wilderness of Maon is here. And I was just going to say, I just noticed this the other day. We talked about the forest of Hereth. I was thinking it was here. It's here, but I don't know why none of the lines go up to it, so we'll just omit the fact that I missed the forest of Hereth. I'm sorry about that. Okay. David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 young men. And David said to the young men, go up to Carmel and go to Nabal and greet him in my name. And thus you shall greet him. Peace be with, peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. I hear that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm, and they missed nothing all the time they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son David. Remember, David was a shepherd. David is familiar with what happens every year when they shear the sheep. It's time for a feast. And because that's what they've been working all summer for, is to get that wool. And he's familiar with this. So this is not something that's new to him. And one thing he's not used to, though, he's a poor shepherd, used to just tending a few sheep. He's not used to being with a group of shepherds. He's not used to having a landowner or a shepherd owner that is managing this business. So when David's young men came, they said to Nabal in the name of David, and they waited. After Nabal answered, and David, yeah, forgive me, I'm very tired. And Nabal answered David's servants, who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and water and meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men who come from I don't know where? So David's young men turned away and came back and told him all this. And David said to his men, every man strap on his sword. And every man of them strapped on his sword. So David was not used to being treated so rudely. And he had a quick response. David also strapped on his sword, and about 400 men went up after David, and while 200 remained with the baggage. But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife. Behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to greet our master, and he railed at them. Yet the men were very good to us, and we suffered no harm. And we did not miss anything when we were in the fields, as long as we went with them. They were a wall to us both by night and by day, and while we were with them, keeping the sheep. Now therefore, know this, and consider what you should do, for harm is determined against our master and against all his house. And he is such a worthless man that one cannot speak to him. Nabal, his name means fool or folly, did not have much respect. He had a lot of land, he had a lot of sheep, that he did not have a lot of respect because he was a harsh man. He really, greed had really gotten into his heart. He was very, as much as the Lord had blessed him, he wished to hold on to every last cent. Then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 skins of wine and 5 sheep already prepared, and 5 seahs of parched grain, and 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs, and laid them on donkeys. And she said to her young men, Go on before me, behold, I come after you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. And as she rode the donkey and came down under cover of the mountain, behold, David and his men came down toward her, and she met them. Now David had said, Surely in vain I have guarded all this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, and he has returned me evil for good. God do so to the enemies of David, and more also, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all who belong to him. David's intent was murder. David was just going to slaughter them. You have to remember that just previously, he was just about at the end of his tether. He had been on the run for such a long time. He had been betrayed everywhere he turned. Even among the people that he saved, he was betrayed. He felt like he had not a friend in the world. And he did not let that sour his attitude. What he did was he protected these shepherds in the field like kinsmen, like they're his own friends, because he understood about shepherds. And he just couldn't handle the rejection. Nabal was so rude about the way he went about that rejection, it just set David off. When Abigail saw David, she hurried and got down from the donkey and fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, On me alone, my Lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. Let not my Lord regard this worthless fellow Nabal, for his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is within him. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my Lord, whom you sent. Now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from your blood guilt and from saving with your own hand. Now then, let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be as Nabal. And David said to Abigail, Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand. For surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you hurried and came to meet me, truly by morning there had not been left in Nabal so much as one male. Then David received from her hand what she had brought him, and he said to her, Go up in peace to your house. See, I have obeyed your voice, and I have granted your petition. This is a lesson in influence. David expected thanks for protecting Nabal's shepherd and was frustrated with his response to the point he considered murder. Abigail was discerning and understood this and did what she could to smooth things over. And the reason and to reason with David. David responded to reason and was thankful that he didn't end up with innocent blood on his hands. And Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. And I enjoy this particular translation and the words here, just because it's written fairly well. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. So she told him nothing at all until the morning light. In the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. And about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. The pairing of Abigail and Nabal was not a good pairing. Nabal was a cruel man, and Abigail was a discerning woman. And it just does not mix very well. And Abigail did what she could in Nabal's defense, but in the end, I guess it's what helped kill him. It says here in the later that the Lord struck Nabal and he died. And earlier you see he said, I have not sought salvation with my own hand. One of the things in the Old Testament, they always say, vengeance belongs to the Lord. Really what they're trying to say here is, if someone has wronged you, the answer to someone who has wronged you is not to wrong them back. It's just to go to the Lord about it. And in this case, the Lord responded. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Blessed be the Lord who has avenged the insult I received at the hand of Nabal, and he has kept back his servant from wrongdoing. The Lord has returned the evil Nabal on his own head." Then David sent and spoke to Abigail to take her as his wife. When the servants of David came to Abigail at Carmel, they said to her, "David has sent us to you to take him as his wife." And she rose and bowed with her face to the ground and said, "Behold, your handmaid is a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord." And Abigail hurried and rose and mounted a donkey, and her 5 young women attended her. She followed the messengers of David and became his wife. And David also took Ahinoam of Jezreel, and both of them became his wives. Saul had given Michal, his daughter, David's wife, to Palti, the son of Laish, who was of Gallim. One of the things I like about Abigail, we're not going to hear anything else from Abigail. This is Abigail's story in a nutshell. But there's some really good attributes that Abigail has. And one of them is she is very respectful. She bowed to the ground every time she referred to David, and she acted as a servant. She wasn't above being a servant, which is something because she is the wife of a very rich landowner and is in charge of 5 of her own handmaidens all the time. But her humility and her discernment is one of the things that makes her special. Matthew 5:9, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." That's one of the other abilities that Abigail had that's probably unique. And I think this discernment, we'll talk a little bit more about it later. Discernment really just means that she's able to look at this situation and be able to lead David in the right way to go. She's able to reason with him. She's able to talk sense into him. When he's only seeing red, she helps him see reason. And that may not be the only way you can be a peacemaker, but certainly some people are more gifted at that than others. Some people have a higher social intelligence. They're able to diffuse situations. They're able to counsel. And we need a lot of those. We need those kind of people. It's nice to have somebody like that in your life. I mean, not everybody has somebody that they can go to when they're in a situation that can help them see the sensible way to go. And it's not necessarily a peacemaker. Sometimes you just need somebody that has more experience, maybe somebody that's older, but maybe just somebody that's more spiritually minded than you, and someone you can go to for advice. Another thing that's obvious here, and it's a good time to bring it up, Old Testament marriage. Some people will suggest to you that brides are just property in the Old Testament, and there is some sort of different cultural thinking about marriage in the Old Testament versus modern marriage. But in the short amount of research I've done, I was going to try to do a full survey of the Bible and read all the husband-wife interactions, because, I don't think I've ever seen those all laid out before. But one of the first ones I saw when I was researching this was Abraham and Sarai. And Sarai says to Abraham, okay, I want you to use the handmaiden here to produce an heir. When the handmaiden becomes pregnant, she goes back to Abraham and says, she's looking down on me because she's pregnant. And Abraham responds, do with her what you will. It just seems like there's most of these Old Testament marriages aren't simply a property situation. Even though there's a bride price paid for women, it's most of the relationships are pretty healthy that I've seen. This verse in Deuteronomy 24:5, when a man takes a bride, he must not go out with the army or be liable for any duty. He is free to stay at home for 1 year so they can bring joy to the wife he has married. That doesn't sound like something that you're going to do to a piece of property. This sounds like a regular relationship. And I think personally, I'm not 100% sure on this, but here David's on the run. He's got 2 wives. It's not necessarily the best deal for them because he's on the run. He doesn't really have a place to hang his hat. But I believe that once David becomes king, that's when he starts having children. I think he took the time once he became king. It did not have to be on the run constantly. He took that time and gave attention to his wives. Here's another one in Deuteronomy. I'm not a big Deuteronomy guy, but I found a lot of Deuteronomy this week. When you come to the land, it's kind of small. When you come to the land that your Lord has given you, and you possess it and dwell it, and then say, I will set a king over me like all the nations that are around me, you may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. Which is interesting, having that in Deuteronomy before, Deuteronomy should be before Samuel. So they already were anticipating having a king. But then, of course, there's the verse 17a, the first part. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away. Now, we know, as far as we know, Saul just had the one wife, Ahinoam. But we know several instances in the Bible where there is a polygamy situation. You start out in the first part of Samuel with Elkanah, who has 2 wives, Hannah and Peninnah. And he seems to have a really good relationship with Hannah and Peninnah. But the polygamy situation creates a lot of issues. Let's see here. All right. Being as his father say, I thought it would be a good time to look at the sons. This is going to go ahead and just move ourselves along as far as the number of sons he had at different times. But Amnon was Ahinoam, who's just got married. Amnon was a child. Daniel by Abigail. And then we have a couple other wives, Maacah, Haggith, Abital, and Eglah, who we don't know anything about. But once he becomes king in Hebron, there we have those wives are acquired. And then we have Bathsheba here having several children. And then we have these children by concubines. So obviously he had a lot of wives. And part of the reason polygamy existed is because it wasn't widespread, but it was more common when people had a lot of money, because basically there's a bride price involved with having wives, and they're more of a drain on the economy of a household than in production. But the reason they want wives is to, as most homes were their own economic center as well, you want to produce children. Those children can work for you and become the heirs of your land, help you take care of your land. Also, the wives themselves basically considered it an esteem issue to have more children. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we have these three wives right now. Michal, she's the only woman in the Bible recorded as having loved her husband, which is interesting, but I don't think she's the only one that did, but she's the only one that's recorded that did. She's the only woman for which David paid a bride price, as far as we know. She claimed David threatened her life, which distressed Saul, and she was regifted to another man named Palti. I don't want to spoil too much on this, but I can tell you one thing. Palti really thought a whole lot of Michal. And now Abigail was beautiful and discerning, but Abigail may have had a lot of influence on David's behavior. After David met Abigail, suddenly David began to use gifts of food as a way of making people feel comfortable. And I just think that's very interesting. You don't hardly see this anywhere else in the Bible, but all of a sudden David is using these gifts of food. And I think one of the reasons that this tale of Abigail's in here and not the tale of Ahinoam, not the tale of Eglah, not the tale of that, is because of these qualities. And it kind of changed his outlook on things. All right, moving on. Verse 1, then the Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah, saying, is not David hiding himself among the hills of Hachilah, which is east of Jeshimon? So Saul arose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph with 3,000 chosen men of Israel to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul encamped on the hill of Hachilah, which is beside the road, the east of Jeshimon. And David remained in the wilderness when he saw that Saul came after him into the wilderness. So David really doesn't get a break yet. David sent out spies and learned that Saul had indeed come. So we're going to stay in this general area in the wilderness. Then David rose and came to the place where Saul had encamped. And David saw the place where Saul lay with Abner, the son of Ner, the commander of his army. And Saul was lying within the encampment while the army was encamped around him, which is, where you'd expect the king to be, right in the middle of the camp. It's the safest place to be. Then David said to Ahimelech the Hittite, who was Joab's brother, Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, who will go down with me to the camp to Saul? And Abishai said, I will go down with you. So David and Abishai went to the army by night, and there lay Saul sleeping with the encampment, with his spear stuck in the ground at his head, and Abner and the army lay around him. And Abishai said to David, God has given your enemy into your hand this day. Now please, let me pin him to the earth with one stroke of the spear. I will not strike him twice. But David said to Abishai, do not destroy him, for who can put out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? And David said, as the Lord lives, the Lord will strike him, or his day will come to die, or he will go down into battle and perish. The Lord forbid it, that I should put out my hand against the Lord's anointed. But take now the spear that's at his head and the jar of water, and let us go. One thing that David tried to keep consistent, what you see, Abigail had reminded him something important, that he does not need to take salvation into his own hand. Salvation belongs to the Lord. And she had reminded him of that when he had forgotten. And here he is remembering it again at an important point. Now, God's anointed, he felt a special reverence for, greater than other situations. But just because Saul was pursuing him, that's no reason for him to attack or kill Saul. So David took the spear and the jar of water from Saul's head, and they went away. No man saw it or knew it, nor did any awake, for they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen upon them. In case you're wondering how David sneaks into the middle of an army where the king is laying and the commander of his army, Abner, who is actually an excellent commander, it's because the Lord helped, because that's really would not be possible, let's face it. Then David went over to the other side and stood far off on top of the hill with a great space between them. And David called to the army and to Abner, the son of Ner, saying, "Will you not answer, Abner?" Then Abner answered, "Who are you who calls to the king?" And David said to Abner, "Are you not a man who is like you in Israel? Why then have you not kept watch over your lord the king? For one of the people came in to destroy the king of your lord. The thing that you have done is not good. As the Lord lives, you deserve to die, because you have not kept watch over your Lord, the Lord's anointed." And now we see where the king's spear is, and the jar of water that was at his head. Saul recognized David's voice and said, "Is this your voice, my son David?" And David said, "It is my voice, my lord, O king." And he said, "Why does my lord pursue after his servant? Or what have I done? What evil is on my hands? Now therefore let my lord the king hear the words of his servant. If it is the Lord who has stirred you up against me, may he accept an offering. But if his men, may they be cursed before the Lord. For they have driven me out this day, that I should have no share in the heritage of the Lord, saying, go serve other gods." David, at this point in the whole chase, David has decided he's not going to be able to stay in Israel. That's basically what he's confessing here. It seems kind of weird the way he said it, go serve other gods. But David is an Israelite first and foremost. The thought of living among the Philistines disgusted him. He did not want to be there. And he felt like it was such a horrible thing. It was such an indignity for him to go live among these uncircumcised Philistines. But he knew that's what he's going to have to do. "Now, therefore, let not my blood fall to the earth away from the presence of the Lord. For the king of Israel has come out to see a single flea, like one who hunts a partridge in the mountains." David said, if I'm going to die, let me die in Israel, the place that I love, the place that I've defended, where my Lord God is the ruler. He wanted to be somewhere familiar. Then Saul said, "I have sinned. Return, my son David, for I will no more do you harm, because my life was precious in your eyes this day. Behold, I have acted foolishly, and I have made a great mistake." I never knew the precious in your eyes was actually in the Bible, but it is. And David answered and says, "Here's a spear, O king. Let one of the young men come over and take it. The Lord rewards every man for his righteousness and faithfulness. For the Lord gave you into my hand today, and I would not put out my hand against the Lord as anointed. Behold, as your life was precious this day in my sight, so may my life be precious in the sight of the Lord, and may he deliver me out of all tribulation." A lot of the conversations that David has here with Saul is almost like a prayer. You see that also in his songs. A lot of his songs are almost like a prayer, because I believe it's because he has such a good prayer life, number one. And number two, he's always putting God's first. Whoops. Then Saul said to David, "Blessed be you, my son David. You will do many things and will succeed in them." So David went his way, and Saul returned to his place. So, not at En-Gedi, but right in this area is where we had this second incident. Then David said in his heart, "Now I shall perish one day by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me that I should escape to the land of the Philistines. Then Saul will despair of seeking me any longer within the border of Israel, and I shall escape out of his hands." You know, they say, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I think that's what David's going here because, you know, Saul had already said he wasn't going to hurt him anymore. And he knew that Saul's word was not very good. And at this point, he was tired of feeling like his life was constantly in jeopardy. He had just married a couple of interesting ladies. He was on the run. I think he was feeling like, hey, maybe things will be okay. Then all of a sudden, Saul jumps up again. So David arose and went over, and he had 600 men who were with him to Achish, the son of Maoch, king of Gath. And David lived with Achish of Gath, and he and his men, every man with his household, and David with his two wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel, and Abigail of Carmel, Nabal's widow. And when it was told Saul that David had fled to Gath, he no longer sought him. One thing's for sure, Saul feared the Philistines more than he was interested in chasing David. Then David said to Achish, "If I have found favor in your eyes, let a place be given me in one of the country towns, that I may dwell there. For why should your servant dwell in the royal city with you?" So that day Achish gave him Ziklag. Therefore Ziklag has belonged to the kings of Judah to this day. The number of the days that David lived in the country of the Philistines was 1 year and 4 months. So this is a pretty long stay. We have Ziklag here. Finally, at this point, now David and his men went up and made forays against the Jeshurites, the Girzites, and the Amalekites, for these were the inhabitants of the land from of old, as far as Shur to the land of Egypt. David would, excuse me, I am so tired. And David would strike the land and would leave neither man or woman alive, but would take away the sheep, the oxen, the donkeys, the camels, and the garments, and come back to Achish. The main reason here that he's destroying all the inhabitants, other than it's God's will, part of the reason is he's living in the land of the Philistines. So you don't really want to leave witnesses behind saying, "Oh, I was attacked by David," because then King Achish would figure out what was going on. When Achish asked, "Where have you made a raid today?" David would say, "Oh, against the Negeb of Judah, or against the Negeb of Jerahmeelites, or against the Negeb of the Kenites." Now, we all know who Judah is, but the other two are allies of Israel. And David would leave neither man or woman alive to bring news to Gath, thinking, lest they should tell him about us and say, "David has done." Such was his custom all while he lived in the country of the Philistines. And Achish trusted David, thinking, "He has made himself an utter stench to his people Israel, and therefore he shall always be my servant." In those days, the Philistines gathered their forces to war to fight against Israel, and Achish said to David, "Understand that you and your men are to go out with me into the army." David said to Achish, "Very well, you know what your servant can do." And Achish said to David, "Very well, I'll make you my bodyguard." Now the Philistines had gathered all their forces at Aphek, and the Israelites were encamped by the spring that is in Jezreel. As the lords of the Philistines were passing by hundreds and by thousands, and David and his men were passing in the rear with Achish, the commanders of the Philistines said, "What are these Hebrews doing here?" And Achish said to the commanders of the Philistines, "Is this not David, the servant of Saul, the king of Israel, who has been with me now for days and even years since he deserted to me? I have found no fault in him to this day. But the commanders of the Philistines were very angry with him, and they said to him, "Send the man back that he may return to the place which you have assigned him. He shall not go down with us to battle, lest in the battle he become an adversary to us. For now, could this fellow reconcile himself to his Lord? Would it not be with the heads of the men here? Is this not David, of whom they sing to one another in dances? Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And David said to Achish, "Well, what have I done? What have you found in your servant from the day I entered your service until now, that I may not go and fight against the enemies of my lord the king?" And Achish answered David and said, "I know that you are as blameless in my sight as an angel of God. Nevertheless, the commanders of the Philistines may have said, 'He shall not go up with us to the battle.' Now then, rise early in the morning with the servants of your Lord who came with you, and start early in the morning, depart as soon as you have light." So David set out with his men early in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines, but the Philistine went up to Jezreel. The interesting part of that last little bit, David was kind of pushing his luck a little bit because he was offering to fight against the Israelites. And I guess the reason he did that is because he already knew the Philistine commanders had convinced Achish that they're not going to let him come along. But he still pleaded his case. So we'll just leave it here at Ziklag, and next week we'll visit what happens next. We can leave with Philippians 1, 9 through 11. It's my prayer that your love may abound more and more with knowledge and all discernment, so that you may approve what is excellent, and so be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, the glory and praise of God. Now, the discernment here may not be the same kind of discernment that Abigail had, but the point is really that it's important for us to help one another when we're in situations and we don't really know what to do. And we can all be people that are like Abigail are kind of rare, but we need more of them. And hopefully, people that need them will be able to find someone that's like that. So we'll continue our review. Next week, we're going to go through, it's kind of a complex part here, 1 Samuel 28, and also chapter 30, and then through 1 Samuel 1 through 3 through 5. Hopefully we'll get that far. I appreciate it very much. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.